Hey guys, in this video I want to walk you through how to use the new Reaticulate Editor. One of the things that you'll notice in OTR version 2 and beyond is that there is a new menu tab called OTR Reaticulate Management. This particular tab gives us items to launch the new Reaticulate Editor. We have on the toolbar, New, which is to create a blank new articulation. We've got New from Existing. We have Edit Existing, and we have Remove. It would have been nice to build them all into one GUI just for the way that this had to be done. At this point in time, they're all separate. So just know that if you want to perform any of those functions, you have to click on each button and then close it out after each one. That's really important. So if we create a new bank, we can click on the New button. It will launch the new Reaticulate GUI editor. What you're going to see in the editor itself is that you have 16 particular articulation slots running vertically down the screen, and then running horizontally you have different options that go with each articulation. At the top of the editor you'll see different banks of articulations. So you can have up to 128 articulations with Reaticulate. Just know that you've got to click on the tabs 1 through 16 and so on to 128. Now, it's important to note any articulation that you create with Reaticulate is what would be considered a global change. Now, this is something that's kind of inherent with Reaticulate itself. It's not something that has been developed specifically in a way for OTR. So this is just the way Reaticulate works. Basically what it means is that when you create an articulation and save it to a project, if you make a change to that articulation once you've created it, it retroactively applies to all projects. And the reason is basically that each project contains more or less an ID. It basically says, at this place in the project, I'm going to play the articulation ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm just coming up with a number. And when it does that, it's going to play whatever is loaded into the global Reaticulate articulation file for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm telling you that now because one of the things you may want to consider is versioning, meaning that when you create an articulation, if you do have to edit it down the line and it has been used in previous projects, you probably don't want to just edit it. You probably want to create a new one, rename the old one something as in previous projects, and then you have your new articulation that you have set up. So that being said, just keep that in mind when you're going through it. I'm going to show you real quickly how to create an articulation map for an entire library. And I'm going to show you the ways that I've set up various articulations. You'll notice down here at the bottom in the right corner of the menu, you have an ability to pre-populate this form. And OTR comes with a number of pre-configured setups. So you can have, for example, 16 channel direct. What this means is that it's gone ahead and filled in 16 different articulation slots. You'll see that none of the others are filled in. And basically each time you click on one of these guys in your project, it's going to trigger a different MIDI channel. Now, I'll explain what this does here in a minute, but I'm just kind of giving you an idea of how this is set up. In another one, let's do the key switches. So we'll do this one. Okay, so in this particular setup, we did use Flex Router. I'll get into that in another video, but what has been pre-configured in this particular template, you have 128 articulations loaded, and they have been built with key switches. So you have different key switches that would trigger events. Now you may be saying, what is this? What's an articulation map? All right, let's come back out of this for a second so you can see what's going on. I have 4 tracks loaded in this project. I've got a piano, I have the Redope 2 library, I've got ADO's Alien Drum, and then Berlin Woodwind's flute. All of these give me really good examples of how to show you how to set up articulation maps. Now, Noir is just a piano. There isn't much going on. Basically, we only have one way to play. So what I choose to do in this particular case with Reaticulate, I either don't have it loaded at all, or if I do, I will load a default Reaticulate map. Now, this particular track does not have anything loaded on it, but what a default would look like is if I go to Insert Tracks from Template, go to Reaticulate, go to Contact, and go to the stereo outs. We've just added this new instrument. So I'm going to call it Noir Pure. I'm just going to put Ria so we know which one we're talking about. And you'll notice that what it has done at the top of the screen is it has added an extra plugin. And so what we have on the first one is we just have a contact instrument. On the second one, we have contact with the Reaticulate controller. Now, when you're using Reaticulate, you have to make sure that each of your tracks has Reaticulate on it. When we get into the other two, you'll see that they have those at the top on their track. If you're adding a new one, when you go insert track from template, you're going to need to make sure that you insert from Reaticulate. Reaticulate gives you the ability to choose blank templates as well as templates that already have instruments preset up on them. Now, you can always add Engine or Contact or Opus or whatever you want, but they're there. That being said, let's go back to the instrument we just added. Let's click on Contact. Let's go over to our library. We'll go back and we'll load in Noir Pure. Okay, so we have our instrument. And then what we're going to do on the right-hand side, you'll see now it looks a little bit different than the first one. The first Noir shows that you have no articulations loaded, and it doesn't have Reaticulate. The second one says, hey, I recognize there's a Reaticulate plugin. Let's have something here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little menu button. Or you can click on Edit Track Banks, whichever you want. I'm going to click on Add Bank. And from the drop down, I'm going to go to OTR Defaults and OTR Single Articulation Default. Now, for me, what this does is it says what my mappings are that I've pre-built for this and allows me to select just a default articulation. Now, you may be saying, why do you even need that for one instrument? You don't. For me, I like to have Reaticulate loaded on all of my instrument tracks. That way I can see if I've mapped them or if I have not. And if I've mapped them, then something's there. If I have not, then I'll know I need to load an articulation. But anyway, for the purpose of this, you can see that we have one articulation for the piano. You don't have to edit it. You don't have to do anything special. It just is. Now let's look at ADO Alien Drum. Now, this particular instrument has a variation of ways it can be played. So if we load up Contact, and you'll see a lot going on here, let's just first look at one instrument. This particular instrument allows you to select various playing styles. And when you select those playing styles, you've got to come into Contact and you have to change them by clicking on the arrows. Now, that's okay if you want to take the time to do that each time you use the instrument, but you may have instruments that you want to set up all the time. So what I have done instead is I've taken the ADO's Alien Drum and I have put each different version of it onto a different MIDI channel. You'll see I've got MIDI channel 1, MIDI channel 2, and so on all the way down to MIDI channel 15, which is the last of the articulation slots for this particular instrument. So what this means is that I have 15 different contact instruments, but it's all the same thing. It's all ADO's Alien Drum. And if you look at the right-hand side, you're going to see that I now have this entire list down the right side of the articulations. So what that means is I can click on Pinged and play it, and you can see it's coming out, the meters were coming out of channel 1. If I click on Palmed, coming out MIDI channel 2, muted, and so on, all the way down the list. Okay, so you may be saying, what have you set up here? What does that look like? Well, I'm going to open up this particular template. So I'm going to go to Edit, and I am going to load up ADO's Alien Drum. I'm not sure where it's going to be on this list. There it is. And you will see that what I have added are 15 articulations, and they have selected a standard MIDI channel, and they have selected channels 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. These correspond to what was in Contact. Now, in this particular layout, I kept all the colors the same for the simplicity of it. But if I wanted to change the color, I'm going to hit save and then come over to the Reaticulate window. And if I hit refresh, you'll see that I have now changed the color of that. So I'm going to go back to the default. When I go back to the default, though, I'm also going to change the icons. These icons are not icons that I've created. These are icons specific to Reaticulate. So visit reaticulate.com and you can see what they look like, what they're supposed to mean. This is just a way to get the icons that are specified in the Reaticulate manual. So for example, if that were actually a spiccato articulation, I may want a spiccato icon and it would look like this. But we're going to put it back to normal. Save those changes, refresh our window, and we're good. Now, you may be asking why I'm refreshing it. Everything in Reaper in general requires you to run a script and then something happens. So basically, I've run a script here. It did some nice programming stuff on the backside, executing that script, but Reaticulate doesn't know that script has been updated. So you just have to refresh it and that will show you the latest and the greatest. Okay. So that is what this particular articulation looks like. It's very similar when we went to new. If we had chosen the 16 channel template, it looks very similar to this guy. Sorry about that. I was clicking on things I didn't need to click on. And it's there so you can kind of see how this is laid out. Now, if you really wanted to get creative with this, let's do this. Let's create a blank template. And let's just use that 16 channel direct MIDI. And we're going to call this one Tester. And we're just going to save that. Now, over on our articulation selection, I can come over here. I'm going to hit the refresh button just so Reaticulate knows that we've done something. I'm going to click on the drop down. I'm going to go to OTR user. And down here, I added this one called Tester. Now you'll see each of these channel names was called, I didn't edit them, so they just stayed the same. So you have blank channel 1 all the way through 16. And what you'll notice is that these guys, even though they're not named the right thing, they still trigger the right instrument all the way down. Now, if you remember, we only have 15. So 15 triggers the last one. 16 won't play anything because we don't have anything at 16. So this is basically a map. Reaticulate serves as an air traffic controller and says, whatever you clicked on here, I'm going to play over in Contact. And so that is what is happening. But we're going to put this guy back to our alien drum. And we are good to go. Okay, so that is a good example of the regular MIDI channel setup. Berlin Woodwind's Flute 1 plus sound effects is a way that I have set up from the original Berlin Woodwind's legacy library. I have included Flute 1, and then I also have the expansions from orchestral tools. And one of those expansions is a sound effects library. That sound effects library adds a lot more articulations for the Flute 1 position. So what I have done is included all of those within one track. Now, if I click on the track, you'll see I've already got it preloaded over here. We have a ton of articulations. And you may be thinking, that's more than 16. How did you get those in there? We know we only have 16 MIDI channels that we can work with. Well, this is a really good example of kind of using all of OTR's features with Reaticulate's features. What we have done is within Contact, I have loaded each articulation that's available, each patch articulation, I'll say, on a track. And you'll see that this goes all the way down to the 16th slot. So MIDI channel 14, MIDI channel 15, MIDI channel 16. But within each of these instruments, there are variations of it. So for example, with flute legato, we can play without legato, without vibrato, with romantic vibrato, and with progressive vibrato. And all of that is happening within the legato patch. So we can choose legato, and what you'll see is if I click on that, you'll notice this toggle here without is selected. If I click legato romantic, it has changed the articulation. Legato progressive, same thing. Okay, so that means that we can do multiple things within each patch as well. So what does that look like? Let's go ahead and I'm going to load up the instrument. Okay. So what you will see is that we have loaded within the first 3 slots for those legatos. We have legato, legato romantic, and legato progressive. For now, let's skip over the flex router concept. We're going to get into that in just a minute. But we do have CC3 selected for each of those with different values. And you may be saying, why do we have CC3 loaded in there? Well, Orchestral Tools maps already out of the box. It has said that these buttons are controlled by CC3. So if I had a fader or a knob mapped to CC3, I can just move that fader up and down. At one end of the fader or knob, you get without. One end you get progressive, and halfway in between you get romantic. So what we have done is we've said when you send information on MIDI channel 1, we also want to send CC3 a value of 1, and it's going to trigger the legato value. So we've taken the time to map out each of those guys. Sustains has a very similar look. So Sustains also uses CC3. Now, many of the others just have one articulation per patch. Others do have some additional CC values. You'll see down here at the bottom, articulation 15 and 16 actually uses CC50. Now, if you take a look at this, you're going to notice that our articulations went down to 16, and that took us to the trills, which trills in here, we haven't filled up everything yet. We're actually on slot 10, slot 11, slot 12. So even though it's the 16th articulation, we're only at MIDI channel 11. We can click on the next articulations, and you can see we have more on MIDI channel 11, 12, 13, 14. And we get all the way up here, and you start to see more articulations. Now what we're about to look at is specific to Flex Router. So everything you've seen thus far could have been done with a regular Reaticulate contact patch. Now, what I have added on this particular patch, if I were creating this track from scratch, I would have right-clicked, gone Insert Track from Templates, gone to Virtual Instruments, gone to Reaticulate, and I would have gone to Flex Router. In this case, I've chosen CC117. I have 2 variations. I'll say it doesn't matter which one, but they're there because it might matter. We chose CC117 and then chose this instrument to stereo outs because Orchestral Tools uses the lowest note on the keyboard, that's C-2, to trigger events inside of its instrument. So when I read the manual, basically I said, okay, that Flex Router option is off the table, because if I want to send information on the lowest note on the keyboard to kind of control some things in the background, then it's going to interfere with my intentions, because Orchestral Tools has programmed the instrument to use C-2. But Orchestral Tools has not done anything with CC117. Most libraries don't. So those 2 are generally avoided with libraries, but I've provided variations so that if you do have interference with it, you can choose the other one. That being said, when we choose one with Flex Router, what has happened is the instrument itself already has a script loaded for the multi, which up here you can see I've got this Flex Router loaded. If I click on KSP, you'll see that there are some additional things that you would not see with a contact instrument regular. For example, a regular contact instrument, if you click on the KSP, is not going to show you anything. Flex Router is a script that has been added to the instrument. So anyway, all of this was set up and saved so you don't have to touch it. That being said, from here, I added each of the Berlin instruments by going to the orchestral tools section. Let me find it real quick. And basically loading in each patch. So they just fall in, the KSP stays up there, and then each patch is there. Now, I could control the MIDI channel regularly in Reaticulate, but I have chosen CC117 for a specific reason, and let me show you why. If we click on our contact instrument, you'll notice that contact has these mystery slots, 17 through 32, 33 through 48, and 49 through 64. What that means is contact actually gives banks of 16 instruments that you can use in theory. And I say in theory because it's not a standard MIDI protocol. Therefore, you could not select in Reaper that you wanted to play an instrument sitting over here on channel 17. And contact calls channel 17 B1. They call channel 33 C1. So basically it's A1 through 16, B1 through 16, C1 through 16, D1 through 16. But what it means is you have 64 potential slots, and we're taking advantage of contact the way it's meant to be taken advantage of. Between Berlin Woodwind's main library and the expansion, we have a number of additional instruments. I mean, look at all these guys. We've got the flutter tongue instruments, jet whistle, wind noises, and we actually filled it all the way up to slot C4. So that's 33, 34, 35, 36. So we made use of 36 MIDI channels in this. The other thing you may be thinking is, well, why would you need to load individual articulations on a track when you can load a multi? Well, this is a really good example because I used multis in here as well. For example, the scale runs, you have a multi-instrument, right? And these are key switches. Boom. There are other variations as well throughout here. So sometimes you have to use the individual patches, the key switch patches, the multi patches. You have to use all of them together. In this particular case, you can't access all of the wonderful articulations that Orchestral Tools has provided you by simply having a multi. You don't get all the access you do from the individual patches. So what I have done in this particular case is I have said, okay, I want every articulation for the flute on one track in Reaper. And this one track is going to play anything that I want. And it's going to play anything I want because I'm going to map all the potential options to contact. Now, something that is really important on this is that we have chosen MIDI channel on all of these. We've chosen Flex Router as the MIDI channel. When you select Flex Router, if I were to, for example, change this to standard, it will let me choose the individual track as standard, or it will auto assign all of the instruments to standard. Now, if I selected standard here, it was, and I hit yes, it's going to apply to everything. So I'm going to hit no. So no just applied it to this one. Now I'm going to pop it back to this, and we're mapped appropriately. If you are trying to select a MIDI channel like B1 or C or D, if you try to select those and it says standard, it's not going to let you. So just as a heads up, you don't get that option. If I went in here and I selected standard and I hit yes, before I do that, I want you to look. We have B1, B2, B3. If I hit yes, it's about to tell you that we're going to have some problems. And it had to reassign those back to the A channel. So you can kind of see where this gets a little hairy. All right, let me close out of that and open it back up. Okay, so finally, it's part of this tutorial with the articulations. One of the things that I mentioned is that we've got key switch options at the bottom. And you may say, well, why do you have key switches? You have these octave runs, major and minor. Well, if you think about this, so my key switch options, I've got how fast they are being performed, which is basically triplets, standard, 2 times, half time, things like that. If I had put every possible combination in here as an articulation, we already have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We already have 10 options here. Well, if you have 12 notes potential in a scale, then that means you have 12 potential articulations per each of these guys. That works itself out to a wonderful 120 articulations. Well, between 120 articulations and then the others I've already loaded, that puts us way beyond the 128 that we have a limit of. And it would be kind of unusable. So basically I have this list and everything works on a single articulation per slot until you get to the runs. And those articulations, we can change the key that they are in. So we've got octave runs major. I'm going to click over here. And we're going to go to our octave runs major. And you can see that these are selected by a different key on the keyboard. So I'm just hitting C, D, E, F, G, and you can see it's triggering those. So I do have a key switch in there, but I know that if I select this articulation, that I need to select which key I'm going to have that articulation play back. So that is a combination in this particular instance of multiple articulations within one MIDI channel, multiple articulations per MIDI channel, and having to use Flex Router to make use of all of the articulations, and also having inside of a Flex Router a key switch patch. So this one is kind of an example of everything that you could possibly do within an instrument for Reaticulate. I hope this makes a lot of sense. It's a lot to review, a lot to soak in. These instruments do require a lot of time. You'll notice that if I go to my personal articulation banks, you'll see that I keep this single default articulation, the templates that come with OTR, and then this is mine. I mean, I've got under each of these guys tons and tons of articulations, and every one of these guys is not just mapped to an articulation, but they have CCs mapped to them. Everything has been set up start to finish just so I don't ever have to do it again. So anyway, there's a lot to this. I could walk you through a number of these. It probably makes sense in one of these videos to maybe show you Bohemian violin. You know what? Heck, let me show you that. I'm going to load it up. All right, so for the last part of this articulation management video, I've loaded what could be the most complex articulation I've ever had to do. So you'll notice the Reaticulate Editor allows you to do a limited scope from what's possible within Reaticulate. You can map up to 3 CCs and their values, 1 note, that's a key switch, or a note hold, which means that you hold it down and when you let it go, it releases that potential articulation. These are methods that developers use to create their instruments. Well, one of these fell outside the box, as was expected. You can create some really crazy articulation maps with Reaticulate. However, for me personally, I had to make some concessions when I was creating the editor for Reaticulate. I wanted it to be for speed, and I wanted to get things done as fast as I could with a large number of libraries because I was mapping all of my hundreds of libraries. So what this means is that if I had a library that happened to fall outside of the standard mapping requirements or what was available within my editor, I had to take another approach. The Bohemian series fell into this category. So what did I do here? If you look at the Bohemian violin, you'll see that I have on the track some additional plugins. These particular plugins are called MIDI CC to note hold. The reason is that Bohemian violin is mapped to have a number of note holds that can happen simultaneously. So you can have more than one note that you hold on a keyboard for an extended amount of time. Well, Reaticulate could normally accommodate for that, but because I built my editor with just one, Bohemian is the only library that fell outside of that standard protocol. But I had to figure out a way to map it. So what I did with this particular instrument is I have all the articulation set up. You can look down the right-hand side here. We've got all the different articulations set up, and there are a ton. I've got performer styles down here at the bottom. And basically what I would do with the Bohemian series is I would choose which type of performer I want to play the part. So I would choose improv legato, for example. And that's going to enter legato mode with the improv algorithm inside of the Bohemian series. And it will play away. Then if I want to go to improv chordal, that's what's happening there. Now, inside of the Bohemian library itself, like I said, you can use multiple key switches. So how do I trigger these different items within the series? And so what I do here is I'm going to load up the articulation. So I've loaded up the articulation for Bohemian Violin, and you will see that if we click across the tabs, we have a ton of articulations. We make it up to 85. And we did so without FlexRouter. FlexRouter is specific to a contact, so we had to do this in another method. But what I did is I loaded all of the legato patches engaged on MIDI channel 1. So you'll see everything that I have set up is on MIDI channel 1. And then when I go to chordal mode, it goes to MIDI channel 2. That's the first thing that I had to do, because there is a toggle within the Bohemian series that says, are you in chordal mode or are you in legato mode? The other thing that I did is I put, so to do that within UVI, I put legato mode where I pre-selected legato, and then I put the same instrument on MIDI channel 2, but I have it set up in chordal mode. So we'll go back to the main library. You'll see that it says polylegato. That's their reference for that. But there, within the actual instrument, aside from that toggle, which is a key switch toggle, I got around that by putting it on different channels in the multi. It uses different note hold values. So what I chose to do is I said, okay, I'm going to map CC 77 and 78. These are just CCs that I use personally. I use 76, 77, 78, and 79 for things that are handled with mappings. So in this particular case, I set up CC 77, CC 78, and 79 is probably used throughout this as well to different values. But from there, what it does is it goes up to this translator. I've got two translators. And the plugins themselves translate CC 77 and CC 78. It will translate those two to note 38 and note 39. Just so we know what else is happening. Within our mapping, we're already tapping down, like, for example, note 24, note 25. We're already using one toggle for a note hold. But we also had to have 2 or 3 notes that we were holding at once to toggle within the instrument. The instrument's so great, but to be honest, it is a very clunky method for playing. So what that actually means is, and let's just kind of cheat and look. So note 38 and 39, if I do a drop down here. So 38 is D1, 39 is D sharp 1. What they're doing is they're triggering different modes within the instrument itself. So basically when you hit CC 77 with a value of 127, it triggers something in the instrument it triggers note 38. And then if you hit 78, then it's going to do the same thing and trigger for 39. I know that may be confusing. May not be doing a great job of explaining it, but the gist of it is if you run out of the capacity to do things in the editor, and it would be rare, but if you run out of the capacity to do things, you can get around it. If you run out of note holds, you can send a CC instead of the note and just turn the CC into another note. That's what I'm doing. So I'm essentially sending 3 note values into the instrument itself to get it set up. So I hope that helps. If you have any questions about mapping, Reaticulate stuff, I'll be happy to help where I can. But anyway, that's a pretty in-depth tutorial. You got to see starting an articulation build from the beginning all the way up to per MIDI channel, to a flex router per MIDI channel, all the way with multis on different patches. And then you got to see something crazy with Bohemian Violin. Again, tons of articulations I've already mapped. And let me show you one more time. If I go into the user side, I mean, you're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these articulations mapped all the way out. And some of these are just wildly crazy. I mean, you see a folder here. If we went to, for example, Celtic Era, it has a ton of instruments in there. Forest Kingdom, my goodness. I mean, that goes on and on forever, right? I think it has like 100 and some odd instruments. So all of these things are mapped out. They take time. Just grin and bear it, but it'll be well worth it when you get through it. And you'll be able to just sit down, load up your instrument, and just play what you want to. So thanks for watching.